Hello. As Kamari and I were first married and started working the horses, Kamari did most of the teaching. I did the riding of a lot of the horses, particularly horses that had challenges or difficulties. You know, when you're a young, new uh, professional, people don't bring you their best horses. They bring you all the ones with problems. And one particular time, we had some people bring a little sorrel mare to me, and they said she's born sour. She runs back to the barn. Well, I can solve that kind of a problem, and you can solve almost any problem with a horse if you know what the problem is. So the first day the little mare was there, people had gone home, and I saddled her up in the barn. No problems there. Got on her, no problems. Started riding out of the barn. Got out about 30 yards from the barn and she turned upside down on me. I mean, just reared up and fell over backwards. And I had everything I could do to get out away from her as she landed on the ground. Rather than being trapped under the saddle, she hopped up, she trotted back in the barn. I said, that's weird. That's it's a little different. So I got on her again and I thought I'd be all ready for her and maybe I could stop her from doing that. And I rode out of the barn again and got the same spot, got out of the barn and she just reared up and went over backward, just flipping, not just rearing up, just flipping over. So went back to the barn and that time I still had trouble getting out of the way. So I went back in the barn and I thought, okay, now what can you do? You can't punish her out of this. You can't talk her out of this. And so the third time, I rode out to the barn with my riding on one side of the saddle, just leaned up against the saddle with my foot in the stirrup. And when she went over, I was ready. And as she hit the ground, I had the bridle reins to where I could keep her head up so that she could, if you can keep a horse's head up, they can't get up very easy. So I held her down and I had piggin string with me. A piggin string is a small rope that ropers use to tie calves' feet together. It's about 5 feet long and a smaller diameter rope. And so I tied her down, went back in the barn, and I got a tarp, brought it out, and I just covered the whole horse with a tarp and just left her there. Left her there for almost 3 hours. I was checking on her so that she was all right. When you cover them up like that, won't fight or anything. They'll lay there very quiet. So when I went back out after about 3 hours, I pulled the tarp off of her and untied the piggin string. And when she came off the ground, I was on her and we were headed away from the barn. And I used the spurs a little bit to make her go away. And so we went to check my cattle, came back, rode into the barn and got off of her and saddled her, or I kept the saddle on her, just got back on her and rode out of the barn. And she went out and she got a little light, a little hesitancy, but I told her to go to go fast out. And so we got over that. But when the people finally came to pick her up, I told them, I said, what did she do when she would go back to the barn? She said, well, she'd turn upside down on us. And I said, you could have killed me but if you had told me, I would have been prepared for it. But she almost got me twice. And so that's the type of thing that happens when people get you. Well, along with that, in trying to teach people to do things with horses, one of the first things that people have to learn to do is to not do anything. If you're riding a horse I have a saying that I made up, until you're good enough to do nothing on a horse, you're not good enough to do something on a horse. Now doesn't go along with an awful lot of trainers. They get riders on and they start telling them what to do and how to do and all of this. And I like to teach riders to be able to do nothing, sit on a horse and have no effect. You've seen a horse where a fly lands on their shoulder and their skin will move and the fly will fly away. You don't have to be harsh to get a horse to understand. They can feel the slightest thing. And so when you uh, get to the point that you can totally leave a horse alone, then you're getting good enough to start doing something with a horse. One of the successes that I had in my early years of jumping with Smokey is I knew that I didn't know anything about jumping, and he was willing to, and so I tried to stay out of his way, just get up there and go with him and be out of his way. And if you can teach a horse to do that, to do what they know how to do, and you do nothing, then there will come a time that you get to the point that you can start doing things to help the horse, both to learn and to go forward. I've told you the story of my veterinary friend who uh, was fighting with his horse, and he said, since I'm a veterinarian, I'm going to give her a relaxer today. And so he got it all ready and had it on the counter there. And he thought, if I'm going to give her a relaxer, I'll take one too. So he takes a relaxer. He tells me that that was the best day of training he had ever had. All time before, it had been a fight from the time he got on her until he got off. But that day they went out and she was just a lady, just did everything that he asked her to do. And he was so glad and so proud. And he came back in, and there lay her tranquilizer on the veterinary counter. He had only taken the tranquilizer for himself and not given the horse one. That's a good point, is that you've got to learn to leave a horse alone and let them do their job. One of the ways that I got to be called the horse whisperer is I got the reputation, if you will, of being able to take a horse that was very difficult and get them to perform. We'll talk about some of those stories in the coming days of horses that I've had that were outlaws and rogues and that sort of thing. So have a wonderful day. Talk to you later.